I wasn't at my sister's wedding when her groom opened a sealed envelope, looked past the altar at a married investor sitting in the third row, and asked, "Who's the father?" I was alone in my apartment in Richmond, watching the ceremony on my laptop. My family had told everyone I was too jealous and unstable to be trusted near Amber's wedding. An hour after Jacob asked that question, the video was everywhere, and the same people who had banned me from the ceremony could not stop calling. What they did not know was that I had already found the confession they planned to force me to sign. Before I tell you how my family tried to turn my sister's secret into my crime, I hope you're doing well today. Stay with me, because what happened after that wedding changed everything, and please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the rest of my story. I'm 40 now. The wedding happened 8 months ago, on May 10th, 2025, when I was still 39. For most of that Saturday morning, I had tried not to watch the live stream. The ivory dress I had bought for the ceremony was still hanging in my bedroom closet, zipped inside its garment bag. I had not returned it because some stubborn part of me had refused to accept that my own sister's wedding could take place without me. At 11:23, I opened the live stream anyway. Amber had insisted on broadcasting the ceremony because it was being held at our family's flagship hotel. She called it a celebration of love and a showcase for the property. The aisle was lined with white roses. The ballroom windows looked out over the spring gardens. Every detail had been designed to make the Mercer family appear polished, generous, and impossible to embarrass. My chair in the front row had been removed. I knew because the seating chart had once listed me between my father and our independent board member. In the final version, my name was gone. A thick courier envelope from the company's attorneys sat unopened beside my laptop. It had arrived less than an hour before the ceremony. I already knew it would contain some version of a severance agreement. I did not yet know it contained a written confession. On the live stream, Jacob stood at the altar in a dark suit, looking more nervous than happy. Amber faced him in a fitted white gown, one hand resting just below her ribs. At 18 weeks pregnant, she was not showing enough for strangers to notice, but our family knew. Then movement near the side entrance caught the camera. Jacob's younger sister stepped away from her seat and accepted a sealed envelope from a courier. She checked the name on the front, hurried down the aisle, and placed it in Jacob's hand. The officiant stopped speaking. Jacob opened the envelope. He read the first page, then the second. His face changed so slowly that, for a moment, I thought the video had frozen. He looked at Amber. Then he looked toward the third row, where Gregory Ashford sat beside an empty chair that should have belonged to his wife. Gregory leaned forward as if he might stand. Jacob's microphone was still live when he asked, "Who's the father?" Amber did not look at Gregory first. She looked at our mother. That was the moment I knew the papers were real. The live stream cut out several seconds later. It did not matter. Guests had recorded their screens. Others had filmed the altar on their phones. Within minutes, different versions of the same clip appeared online, each ending with Jacob's question and Amber's terrified glance toward Mom. I started a screen recording before the official feed disappeared completely. I saved the file with the time and date, then backed it up without sending it to anyone. My hands were shaking, but not because I wanted revenge. I understood something my family apparently did not. When a story begins spreading faster than the truth, the first thing you preserve is the original record. At 12:14, Mercer Hospitality issued a public statement. It did not mention Gregory. It did not mention the envelope. It said I had been excluded from the wedding after making financial threats against my sister and the company. That single sentence did exactly what it was designed to do. People who had never met me began commenting that the bitter older sister must have sent the papers. A local wedding account reposted the video beside an old company photograph of Amber and me. By the time the clip crossed 100,000 views, my absence had become proof of my guilt. My mother called first. Then my father. Then Amber. Then company counsel. Jacob's name appeared once, disappeared, then appeared again. I answered none of them. Mom left a voicemail. "Rachel, do not post anything. Do not speak to Jacob. Do not answer reporters. For once in your life, think about someone other than yourself and protect what the family built. She did not ask whether I had sent the envelope. She told me what to protect. I forwarded the voicemail to Caroline Reed, the attorney I had hired 9 days earlier, and kept the original on my phone. Then I photographed the courier label on the package beside my laptop before opening it. Inside was a severance agreement, a non-disclosure agreement, a stock purchase offer, and a document titled Voluntary Statement of Responsibility. The word voluntary almost made me laugh. According to the statement, I had secretly created a consulting company called North Star Guest Experience. I had hidden $684,000 in unauthorized payments. I had discovered private information about Amber's pregnancy and used it to demand money from Jacob. Finally, overwhelmed by guilt and resentment, I had disrupted the wedding. Every accusation was written in the first person. I established North Star. I authorized the payments. I contacted Jacob. I acted out of jealousy. There was a blank line for my signature at the bottom. I read it twice, not because I believed any of it, but because the document was too specific. At that point, no one had told me the final total connected to North Star was $684,000. I had found irregular invoices, but I had never been given the complete figure. Yet there it was, inside a confession delivered before the wedding video went viral. At the bottom of each page was a small document code. My sister had mocked those codes for years. She said I was the only person who would assign a version number to a seating chart or a flower budget. But version control was how I knew whether a page had been replaced, edited, or quietly recycled. The code on my confession did not identify it as a new document. It belonged to an older drafting sequence. I turned back to the cover sheet. Under the company logo was an internal preparation date, April 24th. 6 days before the board suspended me. More than 2 weeks before Jacob stood at the altar. The statement already accused me of using Amber's secret to extort him. I checked the courier tracking. The package had been processed the previous evening, before anyone outside a small circle could have known an envelope would reach Jacob at the ceremony. My phone rang again. This time, it was my father. I watched his name pulse across the screen, while the meaning of those dates settled over me. The wedding scandal had not caused my family to suspect me. They had already chosen me. They had written my motive, my crime, and my apology before I had even been accused. All they needed was my signature or enough public outrage to make the signature unnecessary. I placed the statement in a clear document sleeve, photographed every page, and sent the copies to Caroline. Then I wrote down the exact time I had opened the package. Only after that did I let myself think back to where it had started. Not with Amber's pregnancy. Not with Jacob's question. It began on April 5th, when a company called North Star appeared in our cash flow report, with an invoice large enough to threaten payroll, and nothing in its file, proving it had done any work at all. 5 weeks before Amber's wedding, North Star Guest Experience appeared in my cash flow report as if it had always belonged there. It was Saturday, April 5th. I was in the finance conference room at Mercer Hospitality, reviewing the next 8 weeks of expenses before a Monday meeting with our regional lender. On paper, the company looked successful. We owned 3 boutique hotels and 2 event venues. Our annual revenue had reached more than $18 million. Revenue, however, was not the same thing as cash. The renovation of our flagship hotel had exceeded its budget by more than $3 million. We owed over $15 million on secured loans, and our monthly payroll and employee benefits cost roughly $520,000. Without new financing, we had enough available cash to operate for about 7 weeks. My father called it a temporary gap. I called it a deadline. Sterling Family Office, which belonged to Jacob's family, was considering a $12 million joint investment. Nothing had been signed. Their letter of intent was conditional, and they still needed updated financial statements, lender approval, and proof that our renovation spending was under control. Dad planned to announce the partnership during Amber's wedding weekend. He believed public confidence could become financial confidence if enough important people were standing in the same ballroom. That morning, I was going line by line through our vendor payments when I found 11 transactions to North Star Guest Experience. The total was $684,000. The descriptions were vague enough to sound impressive without meaning anything. Brand positioning, premium guest experience research, launch consulting, executive hospitality strategy. The invoices covered 14 months, but the file contained no completed reports, no employee list, no detailed time records, and no evidence that anyone from North Star had ever visited one of our properties. There was a glossy proposal, a short presentation, and several invoices. That was all. I checked our accounts payable system to see who had created the vendor file. Maya Torres, one of our senior accounts payable employees, had uploaded the packet. That alone did not concern me. Maya processed hundreds of files under instructions from department heads. What concerned me was the first invoice. I had approved it. It was for $48,000, dated the previous February. The amount was below the threshold that required a full board vote, and the packet had included a proposal signed by Dad. I remembered the transaction. Amber had described North Star as a confidential branding firm helping prepare the flagship relaunch. She said the consultants did not want their strategy circulated before the public campaign. I had approved the invoice with a written condition. Supporting documents due Friday. I opened my exception log. The note was still there, along with 3 follow-up requests that had never been answered. I had intended to stop the next payment if the missing documents were not supplied. Instead, the next payment had gone through while I was handling a lender crisis at our Blue Ridge property. Then another had gone through. And another. It was the kind of control failure I hated most. Not one dramatic decision, but a small exception that quietly became a habit because everyone assumed someone else had checked. I did not accuse anyone of fraud. I started with the simplest explanation. North Star had done real work, and Amber had failed to maintain the file. I emailed Amber, Dad, our corporate controller, Maya, and North Star's listed contact. I asked for the signed contract, final reports, work product, employee names, beneficial owner information, and proof of services. I gave them until Wednesday. Amber called me 9 minutes later. "Do you have to copy half the company every time you want a document?" she asked. I copied the people responsible for approving and maintaining the file. "It's confidential." "Confidential does not mean undocumented," she exhaled loudly. "North Star is working on the launch experience. Some of it is tied to the wedding reveal. Then they should have a contract." "They do. It isn't in the file." "I'll get it." I looked again at the list of payments. "Until then, I'm placing the vendor on hold." Her voice changed. "You can't do that." "I can, and I just did. Dad approved them." "Dad does not replace supporting documentation." There was a pause. Then Amber said, "You know, not everything has to become a crisis just because you found it." I replied, "A crisis is usually what people call a problem after they've ignored the first email." She hung up. On Monday, North Star sent me a link to a website. The site had been created less than 4 months earlier. Every photograph appeared to be stock photography. The office address was a mailbox service outside Washington, D.C. The listed phone number went to an answering service. The company bio claimed North Star had advised luxury hotels across North America, but it did not name a single client, consultant, or completed project. Its registered agent was a lawyer named Marcus Bell. I recognized the name from a financing package Gregory Ashford had introduced to us the previous year. That connection did not prove wrongdoing. Lawyers formed companies for clients all the time. I wrote one word beside the vendor name in my notes: unverified. At the time, Gregory was one of my father's most trusted advisors. He was 50, polished, married, and skilled at making risky decisions sound inevitable. He had introduced us to lenders, attended board dinners, and spoken often about helping Mercer Hospitality grow beyond what he called family business limitations. Amber admired him. I had assumed that admiration was professional. The first response from North Star arrived Wednesday morning. It was not a contract or a report. It was a 2-page summary titled Brand Momentum Findings. The document said our guests valued authenticity, elevated service, and memorable moments. It could have described every hotel in America. I checked the file properties. The document had been created the night before. I forwarded it back and repeated my request. That afternoon, I received an automated alert showing a new North Star invoice had been approved under the authority of the finance department. The amount was $72,000. The approval timestamp was from the previous Thursday at 4:17 in the afternoon. At 4:17, I had been at our Blue Ridge Hotel, almost 3 hours from Richmond, meeting with the property manager about storm damage and vendor delays. My corporate card receipt showed I had purchased fuel near Charlottesville at 3:38. The hotel's inspection log showed I entered the mechanical room at 4:12. The parking system showed my car leaving after 6. I checked my login history. There had been no login from my account. Instead, the transaction had moved through an emergency approval workflow I had designed 2 years earlier. The process allowed our controller to keep essential operations moving if an executive was traveling or unavailable. The invoice did not claim I had personally approved it. It said it had been approved under my department's delegated authority. That distinction mattered. It meant someone did not need my password to place my name over a transaction. They only needed a workflow created to prevent hotels from missing payroll, utilities, or emergency repairs. North Star was not a utility. It was not an emergency. I called our controller, Martin Lewis. He sounded nervous before I finished the first question. Denise said you had already approved the engagement, he told me. My mother is not in finance. She said the board had discussed it. The board has never voted on North Star. She said Amber's wedding campaign was time-sensitive. Who submitted the approval request? There was a pause long enough to answer me. Her office. I asked him to send me everything in writing. He said he would. He did not. By April 16th, I still did not have a valid contract, meaningful work product, or beneficial owner information. I prepared a formal memorandum. I listed each invoice, each missing document, the delegated approval, my travel records, the connection between North Star's registered agent and Gregory, and the fact that the first payment had been approved by me, only on the condition that supporting records be supplied. I did not use the words theft, fraud, or affair. I wrote that North Star could not be verified and recommended an independent review before any further financial certification. I sent the memorandum to all 5 board members, our corporate controller, and the outside accounting firm preparing our compiled financial statements. The accounting firm acknowledged receipt the next morning. They suspended the final compilation and requested a written management response. That was exactly what a responsible outside firm should have done. My mother called less than an hour later. "Why did you send that memo outside the family?" she demanded. "Our accounting firm is not outside the financial process. You made it sound as if we're criminals. I described missing records. You embarrassed your father." I asked who owns a company that received almost $700,000 from us. Gregory said the documents are being assembled. Gregory does not work for North Star. Another silence. It was brief, but I noticed it. Mom recovered quickly. "You are creating panic over paperwork. We have 7 weeks of cash and a vendor no one can verify. We are about to close a $12 million partnership. We are still under review. There is no closing date, which is exactly why you need to stop frightening people." I told her I would withdraw the hold when North Star supplied a valid contract and proof of services. She lowered her voice. "Do not send another message to the accountants. We will deal with this as a family." I had heard that sentence my whole life. When Amber missed a payment, we dealt with it as a family. When Dad promised money we did not have, we dealt with it as a family. When Mom wanted a mistake hidden before guests arrived, we dealt with it as a family. What the phrase usually meant was that everyone would gather in one room until I agreed to make the problem disappear. This time I did not withdraw the memorandum. I did not remove the payment hold. I did not apologize. 2 days later, my father's assistant scheduled a private board meeting for April 24th. The subject line did not mention North Star. It said only, "Rachel's conduct and the future of Mercer Hospitality." Claire Benton called me the morning before the board meeting. She had worked with Mercer Hospitality during a refinancing 3 years earlier, and she was one of the few people who understood both our accounting system and the way my family made decisions when money became tight. "I read the memo," she said. "You were careful. That sounds like the beginning of bad news." "It is. You stopped the payments, documented the exceptions, and notified the accounting firm. From a control standpoint, that was correct. But this is no longer only a controls problem." I looked through the glass wall of my office. Employees crossed the hallway, carrying linen samples, vendor folders, and wedding schedules. No one outside the executive floor knew that we might be 7 weeks from missing payroll. "What do you think it is?" I asked. "A governance problem, possibly a fraud problem, definitely a legal problem. I don't have proof of fraud. You have enough to bring in counsel." I glanced at my formal memorandum, lying beside the phone. "I want to hear their explanation first." Claire was quiet for a moment. "Rachel, people with innocent explanations usually give them before they schedule a meeting about the person asking the question." I knew she was right. I also believed I could still contain the damage if I stayed calm and forced everyone to address the documents. That was my first serious mistake. I prepared for an audit. My mother prepared for a trial. The outside accounting firm sent another request that afternoon. They would not issue the final compiled financial statements until management addressed North Star and explained why payments had continued after my conditional approval. My father came into my office carrying the email. "We don't need an audit," he said. "They aren't performing one. Then why are they asking questions like investigators?" "Because I told them our records were incomplete." He dropped the email on my desk. "We need a management representation letter, that's all." A management representation letter required company leadership to confirm that the financial information we had provided was complete and accurate. It did not transform unaudited numbers into audited ones, but it placed responsibility for those numbers directly on the people signing. Dad put the letter in front of me. "Sign it," he said. "Add a note that North Star's documentation is pending. I can't represent that the statements are complete when almost $700,000 is unsupported." "You approved the vendor." "I approved one invoice with conditions." "You're splitting hairs." "No. I'm identifying responsibility." His jaw tightened. "Do you understand what happens if the Sterling family walks away?" "Yes. That's why I'm not signing something that could give them a reason to accuse us of misleading them later." "We can fix the file after closing." I looked at him. "Please repeat that in writing." He stared at me for several seconds, then picked up the letter. "You've spent too long with spreadsheets," he said. "You've forgotten that businesses survive because people make practical decisions." He left without answering my request. I wrote my reason for refusing directly on the cover memorandum, signed and dated it, then sent copies to every board member and the outside accountants. The board meeting began at 10 the next morning. All 5 directors were present: Dad, Mom, Amber, our independent director, Richard Coleman, and me. Gregory Ashford sat near the end of the table as an outside financial advisor. He was not a director and had no vote. He acted as though neither fact mattered. Dad opened the meeting by discussing liquidity, payroll, and the Sterling investment. Mom interrupted before he reached North Star. "This meeting is not about one vendor," she said. "It is about Rachel's behavior." Richard adjusted his glasses. "The accounting firm asked for a response to her memorandum." "And they will receive one," Mom said, "after we address the damage she caused by sending it." I slid a folder toward Richard. "The damage began when payments were made without evidence of services." Amber gave a tired laugh. "There it is." "What?" "That tone. Like everyone else is a child, and you're the only adult in the room." I ignored the comment and looked at Gregory. "Do you know who owns North Star?" He folded his hands. "I know the firm was brought in for strategic support." "That wasn't my question. I don't involve myself in every corporate registration. Your lawyer is its registered agent. Marcus Bell represents many companies. Then he can provide the beneficial owner information." Gregory smiled as if I had confirmed something disappointing about myself. "This kind of aggressive suspicion is exactly what concerns investors," he said. "What concerns investors is unsupported spending." "Rachel," Dad warned. I opened the vendor summary. North Star received 11 payments. We have no final report, no employee list, no detailed time records, and no verifiable office. Amber pushed the folder away without opening it. They helped me with the relaunch campaign. Show me what they produced. You would hate it no matter what I showed you. That is not an answer. Her eyes filled almost immediately. I had watched Amber cry since she was 6 years old. Sometimes the tears came from pain. Sometimes they came from anger. Most often they arrived when a direct question threatened to remain direct. I am getting married in 16 days, she said. This should be the happiest time of my life, and you've turned it into another investigation. Your wedding is not in the accounting records. It is part of the launch. Then the launch should have a budget. Mom reached for Amber's hand. This is what I mean. She cannot speak to her own sister like a human being. I'm speaking to the director responsible for the project. You always do that, Amber said. You hide behind job titles whenever you want to hurt someone. Richard looked uncomfortable. Dad looked angry. Gregory looked interested. That was when Mom mentioned my former fiancé. Not everyone processes disappointment by becoming obsessed with control, she said. The room went still. My engagement had ended 6 years earlier. It had nothing to do with North Star, Amber, or the company's finances. I should have understood why Mom introduced it. Instead, I gave her exactly the response she wanted. My relationship history does not make these invoices valid. Amber wiped beneath one eye. You can't even say you're happy for me. I attended every dress fitting you asked me to attend. I negotiated the venue contracts you changed 3 times. I covered the deposit when your sponsorship payment arrived late. That isn't the same thing. No, it's measurable. Mom leaned back as if I had proven her case. Richard cleared his throat. Regardless of the family disagreement, the company needs an independent review. I agree, I said. Dad shook his head. We do not have time for a review that frightens lenders and delays the Sterling partnership. You already have an accounting firm refusing to finalize the statements, Richard said. Temporarily, Gregory replied. The underlying business remains sound. North Star's documents can be assembled after the immediate financing pressure passes. I turned to him. Why are you speaking for North Star? His expression did not change. I'm speaking as someone who understands capital markets. Then you understand why no investor should accept a management letter signed in spite of an unresolved vendor issue. Dad pushed the letter toward me again. Last chance, he said. I took out my pen. Amber's shoulders relaxed. Then I wrote beneath the signature line. I decline to certify these statements until the North Star transactions are independently reviewed and supported. I signed beneath that sentence and returned the document. Mom's face hardened. The meeting ended without a formal vote, but the decision had already been made. 6 days later, on April 30th, the board reconvened. Dad moved to place me on paid administrative leave pending an internal review. Mom seconded the motion. Amber voted yes. Richard and I voted no. 3-2. My access was disabled before the meeting ended. Mom was appointed interim finance officer. Maya received additional authority to process vendor records during the transition. Dad and Mom signed the management representation letter in my place. The outside accountants issued only a compilation marked with an unresolved management dispute. They provided no assurance that North Star's records were complete. Security walked me to my office. I packed one framed photograph, a spare pair of shoes, and the notebook I had purchased with my own money. I left company documents where they belonged. As I passed accounts payable, Maya looked down at her screen instead of meeting my eyes. Mom called that evening. Take the next few weeks to rest, she said. You've been under pressure. I've been placed on leave for refusing to sign an inaccurate statement. That is your interpretation. It is written in the minutes. She sighed. The wedding is too close for this drama. Just let your sister have her day. What are you asking? We've removed your name from the guest list. I closed my eyes, not because I was surprised, but because some betrayals still hurt even when they are predictable. Send that to me in writing, I said. Why do you need everything documented? Because every time it isn't, the story changes. The confirmation arrived 20 minutes later. The following morning, I met Caroline Reed for the first time. She had already reviewed my memorandum, the board minutes, and the notice removing me from the wedding. Then she turned her laptop toward me. An email had been sent to Jacob from an address that looked almost identical to mine. The sender demanded $500,000 in exchange for silence about Amber's unborn child. The message referred to North Star by an internal vendor code that had never appeared in any public document. I read it twice. "I didn't send this." "I know," Caroline said, "but whoever did had access to information inside your company." The forged email did more than accuse me of threatening Jacob. It connected me to a secret I had not yet discovered. Caroline did not let me touch the forged email again until she had saved the original file, copied the headers, and documented where it came from. "From this point forward," she said, "you do not log back into any company system. You do not ask a friendly employee to send you files. You do not forward anything from an old account, even if you believe it belongs to you. I built most of those systems. That will not matter if they accuse you of unauthorized access." She slid a legal pad toward me and asked me to list every document I already possessed lawfully. Board minutes, emails sent directly to me, my exception log, the written notice removing me from the guest list, and the memorandum I had distributed before my suspension. I hated the limits immediately. My instinct was to verify everything myself. I knew where the approval histories were stored, which reports could expose altered vendor records, and which backup logs would show who had used the emergency workflow. But Caroline was right. If I returned to the system after my access had been revoked, my family would not have to prove I had created Northstar. They would only have to show that I had crossed a line after being suspended. I paid her $20,000 retainer from my savings that afternoon. Then she sent preservation letters to Mercer Hospitality, Northstar, our outside accountants, and the company's insurance carrier. The letters instructed them not to delete emails, revise documents, overwrite access records, or destroy devices connected to the disputed transactions. For the first time since I had found the invoices, someone outside my family had formally told them they could not make the evidence disappear. My next decision was harder. I still had 8 days before the wedding. I knew where Jacob worked. I had his attorney's contact information from the Sterling negotiations. I could have warned him that an email in my name was false and that something inside the company connected Amber's pregnancy to Northstar. Caroline asked me one question: "What happens when you appear at the hotel and your family has security remove you in front of 200 guests? They'll say I caused a scene. And if you contact Jacob privately, they'll say the extortion email was real." She nodded. "Your family already wrote the story. Do not give them photographs to illustrate it." On May 5th, I sent a formal notice to company counsel and Jacob's attorney. I stated that I would not attend the wedding, contact Jacob directly, or disclose any private information about Amber. The message was not an apology. It was a boundary with a timestamp. When the delivery receipts arrived, I saved them with Caroline. That evening, I stood in my bedroom and looked at the dress I had bought for the wedding. It was pale blue, simple, and expensive enough that Amber had finally approved it after rejecting the first 2 choices. Seeing it brought back memories I had trained myself not to call resentments. On my 16th birthday, Amber had a dance competition 2 towns away. Mom moved my dinner to another weekend because your sister only gets one chance at this. At my college graduation, we left before the reception because Amber had a rehearsal. Dad promised we would celebrate later. We never did. Years afterward, during my first real vacation in almost a decade, a payroll transfer failed. Dad called me from the airport and said no one else understood the system. I spent 2 days in the hotel business center fixing a problem created by an approval he had rushed. Every time, the explanation was the same. Amber had a special day. The company had a special emergency. The family needed me to be reasonable. I had mistaken being useful for being valued. They had not removed me from the wedding because I ruined every occasion. They removed me because this was the first time I had refused to clean up the problem before the guests arrived. On the morning of May 10th, Caroline told me not to sit alone if I could avoid it. I ignored that advice, but I followed all the legal ones. I stayed home. I kept my phone nearby. And shortly before the ceremony began, I opened the live stream. At the time, I did not know who had sent the envelope to Jacob. I learned the full chain later from courier records, video, and sworn testimony. Elaine Ashford's attorney had arranged for a sealed package to be delivered to the hotel. The courier handed it to Jacob's younger sister at the side entrance after verifying her name. She carried it directly to him before the vows. There was no stop at the front desk. No anonymous guest. No contact with me. The package contained a private support agreement signed by Amber and Gregory, an invoice for prenatal testing, and messages in which Gregory referred to the result as confirmation. Elaine had not sent the documents to the media. She had sent them privately to a man who was about to marry someone under false circumstances. Amber had created the public exposure herself. She had insisted on the live stream because the wedding was supposed to showcase our renovated ballroom. She had wanted potential clients, local reporters, and investors to see the Mercer family celebrating inside the property. The microphone remained open when Jacob asked his question. The official feed ended seconds later, but guests had already recorded it. The first public story about me did not come from a stranger online. It came from Mercer Hospitality. The company statement said, "I had been excluded after making financial threats against Amber and the business." It asked the public to respect the family's privacy while implying that I had violated it. That was how thousands of people learned the bride's older sister had not been invited. The statement gave the internet a suspect before anyone asked where the envelope had actually come from. By mid-afternoon, strangers were calling me vindictive, unstable, and obsessed with my sister. Some said I had forged the documents. Others claimed I had paid a guest to interrupt the ceremony. I posted nothing. I responded to no reporters. I forwarded every direct threat to Caroline and kept the original messages. Company counsel called at 3:20. "We know you arranged the delivery," he said. "Put the accusation in writing. You are making this worse." "I have not said anything publicly. You sent Jacob private medical information. I did not send him anything. The company will treat any further interference as evidence of malicious conduct. Then preserve the evidence you believe proves it." He ended the call. Minutes later, Mom left another voicemail saying Jacob would believe the email because it contained information only someone inside the company could know. She was right about one thing. The forged email included Northstar's internal vendor code. That code had never appeared in the live stream, the public statement, or any document sent to Jacob before the wedding. Caroline obtained the original message from Jacob's attorney and examined the header. The sender had used a domain designed to look almost identical to my real address. She pointed to the registration information. "The public record is masked," she said, "but the registrar will still have the purchaser, payment method, and access logs. Can we get them? Not because we ask nicely. What do we need? A lawsuit, a subpoena, or a court order?" 4 days later, Mercer Hospitality gave us exactly what we needed by suing me first. Before Mercer Hospitality sued me, my family tried to purchase my silence. The meeting took place on May 11th, the morning after Amber's wedding collapsed. Caroline arranged for it to be held in a conference room at a neutral law office in downtown Richmond. No one was allowed to arrive unannounced at my apartment, and every document exchanged would be copied before anyone left. When I entered, Mom was already seated beside Dad. Their attorney occupied the chair at the head of the table. A monitor had been positioned near the wall so Amber could join by video. She appeared from a hotel suite wearing a white robe. Her hair had been taken down, but traces of wedding makeup still darkened her eyes. She looked exhausted and furious. No one asked how I was doing. Dad began with the company. "The Sterling family wants an explanation by tomorrow," he said. "They have not withdrawn the letter of intent yet, but that will happen if we cannot control this." "Control what?" Caroline asked. "The damage," Mom said. I looked at her. "Do you mean the video, the pregnancy, or the unsupported payments?" Amber leaned toward her camera. "You are unbelievable. I didn't send the envelope." "You expect anyone to believe that?" "I expect evidence to matter. You destroyed my wedding. Jacob asked you a question. I was not in the building. Her face tightened. You made sure you didn't have to be. Caroline placed one hand on the folder in front of her. We are not here to debate the ceremony. Your counsel requested this meeting to present a proposal. Present it. Dad's attorney slid 4 documents across the table. The first was the same severance agreement delivered to my apartment. The second was a non-disclosure agreement. The third offered to purchase part of my company's stock. The fourth was the statement they wanted me to sign. The offer was simple once the legal language was stripped away. I would admit that North Star had operated under my supervision. I would accept responsibility for the missing documentation and say I had failed to disclose a personal conflict involving Amber. I would also admit sending the email to Jacob during what the statement called a period of emotional distress. In return, the company would pay my severance, avoid referring the matter for criminal investigation, and purchase 6% of my 10% ownership stake. The proposed stock price was less than half the valuation used in our most recent lender package. They were asking me to confess, surrender control, and sell cheaply while the company's value was being damaged by their own conduct. There was another condition. Mercer Hospitality would issue a public statement saying I had stepped away to receive treatment for stress. You want to call me unstable after I sign your confession, I said. Mom folded her hands. We want to explain your behavior in a compassionate way. You want to make the accusation sound charitable. Dad leaned forward. Rachel, we have enough cash for roughly 7 weeks. If the Sterling partnership dies, payroll is at risk. Health insurance is at risk. People who had nothing to do with this could lose their jobs. He knew exactly which argument to use. For most of my adult life, employees had been the reason I stayed late, canceled vacations, and accepted decisions I would never have approved for myself. Mom watched my face carefully. This is bigger than one person, she said. Then why does only one person have to confess? Because the transactions were under your department. They moved through an emergency workflow while I was out of town. You designed that workflow. For utilities, payroll, and urgent property repairs. Dad tapped the statement. That distinction can be explained later. Right now, we need stability. Caroline spoke before I could. My client will not sign an inaccurate statement now, so you can correct it later. Amber laughed from the screen. Of course she won't. She finally has everyone looking at her. I turned toward the monitor. The first public statement after your wedding named me that anyone knew where the envelope came from. Because you threatened us. A forged email threatened Jacob. You were the one investigating North Star. That does not make me the sender. It makes you the only person with a reason. I almost answered, but Caroline touched the edge of my legal pad. It was a quiet reminder not to argue emotion with someone using it as strategy. Instead, I opened the responsibility statement to the page listing the North Star total. Who calculated $684,000? I asked. Dad's attorney replied. The finance team. When? During the internal review. The draft was created before I was suspended. Mom's expression did not change. I continued. It also says I used Amber's pregnancy to extort Jacob. The email to Jacob had not been sent when this document was first prepared. It was a contingency draft, Mom said. For a crime that had not happened? Attorneys prepare for multiple outcomes. Caroline looked toward the company's lawyer. Did your office prepare the original draft? He hesitated. It was created from an internal template. That was not my question. We would need to review the file history. Dad looked from the attorney to Mom. You told me this was drafted after Rachel was placed on leave. Mom kept her eyes on me. The date is not the issue. It becomes the issue when the document predicts the accusation, Caroline said. Amber shifted in her chair. This is ridiculous. She knew about the baby. I knew you were pregnant, I said. I did not know Gregory might be the father. At the mention of his name, Amber looked away from the camera. Mom interrupted. We are not discussing Amber's private life. You are asking me to confess to using it. We are asking you to protect what the family built. The room went quiet. It was the same phrase from her voicemail. The same phrase used in the forged email. Caroline wrote it down, but she did not smile or declare that we had proven anything. A repeated phrase was a clue, not a conviction. Mom noticed. Millions of people say things like that, she said. Then, obtaining the original email records should not concern you, Caroline replied. Dad rubbed his forehead. He looked older than he had the week before. For one brief moment, I could see the fear beneath his anger. The renovation loan carried a personal guarantee. He and Mom had placed a second deed of trust on their house to secure part of it. If the company failed, they would not merely lose their titles. They could lose the home they had spent 30 years treating as proof of their success. Dad looked at me. You are the strongest person in this family, he said. You have savings. You have experience. You can rebuild anywhere. I had heard variations of that sentence my whole life. Rachel can understand. Rachel can wait. Rachel will recover. This time I heard the part they had always left unspoken. Because I could survive the injury, they believed they had the right to inflict it. You are not asking me to save the employees, I said. You are asking me to save you from what you signed. That is not fair, Dad replied. No, it is precisi. I closed the folder. I will not sign the statement. I will not sell my shares at a distressed price. I will not permit you to announce that I am receiving treatment for a condition I do not have. Amber stared at me through the screen. Mom's voice became colder. Then we will provide the first North Star invoice to the insurer and law enforcement, the one with your signature, Caroline answered calmly. Please preserve the original proposal, all subsequent versions, and the full exception log. For the first time, Mom looked uncertain. The meeting ended without an agreement. After everyone left, Caroline and I remained in the conference room. I took the exception log from my folder and placed it in front of her. Then I showed her the first North Star proposal. My signature was real. I had approved the $48,000 payment because the amount was below the board threshold. Dad had signed the proposal, and Amber had described the project as confidential but urgent. I had also written that supporting documents were due by Friday. They never arrived. I should have stopped the second payment, I said. Yes, Caroline replied. I was handling the Blue Ridge emergency. That explains why you missed it. It does not erase the control failure. I appreciated her for saying that. My family needed me either completely guilty or perfectly innocent. Both versions made it easier to ignore what had actually happened. I had made a mistake, but I had not created North Star, falsified services, or taken the money. What happens if we disclose this first? I asked. The insurer may question your judgment. The lender may criticize your controls. Opposing counsel will still use it. And if we wait, they will present it as something you hid. I looked at my signature again. For years, I had believed the safest way to survive my family was to leave them no flaw they could use against me. That strategy had failed. They had simply invented larger ones. Prepare the disclosure, I said. Caroline gathered the documents. Once I admitted the first thing I had done wrong, my family could no longer use it to make me responsible for everything they had done afterward. Caroline prepared my voluntary disclosure over the next 2 days. We did not describe the first North Star payment as an innocent misunderstanding. We wrote exactly what had happened. I had approved one $48,000 invoice, under the threshold requiring a board vote. The proposal carried Dad's signature. Amber had called the project confidential and time-sensitive. I had written that supporting documents were due by Friday. They never arrived. I had followed up 3 times, then allowed an emergency at another property to pull my attention away before the second payment moved through the system. That was my mistake. I signed the disclosure on May 15th and sent it through Caroline to our outside accounting firm, the company's insurance carrier, and counsel for our regional lender. I included the original proposal, my exception log, my emails requesting documentation, and the records showing when I had been at the Blue Ridge property. I did not call myself blameless. I stated that I had failed to enforce the condition quickly enough. Then I stated what I had not done. I had not formed North Star. I had not approved the later invoices. I had not altered the vendor file. I had not received $1 from the company. Caroline read the final paragraph twice before letting me send it. Once this leaves, she said, you cannot take it back. I don't want to take it back. You may still be criticized. I should be criticized for the part I did. She nodded. That answer will help you more than pretending there was no part. My family had always treated accountability as a weapon. Whoever admitted one mistake became responsible for every consequence that followed. I was finished accepting that definition. The next morning, Claire called. She had been retained jointly by our lender and the company's crime insurer to conduct a forensic review. That distinction mattered. She was not working for me, and I could not direct what she examined or what she concluded. "I want one thing clear," she said. "If the records show you were more involved than you disclosed, I will report it. I expect you to. And if they clear you, you report that too. That is how this works." For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to relief. Not because Claire believed me, because belief was no longer the standard. Records were. Claire started with the 2 versions of the original North Star proposal. The copy I had signed included my handwritten condition and a page limiting the initial engagement to a preliminary branding assessment. The version stored in the company's vendor file was different. The page containing my condition had been replaced. In its place was a broader authorization, allowing North Star to bill for strategy, launch consulting, and executive advisory services. The document code at the bottom of the replacement page did not match the code on the rest of the proposal. Amber used to laugh at those codes. Now, one mismatched number proved the file had been altered after I signed it. It did not yet prove who had changed the page. Claire would need the original electronic files, revision history, and system records before making that conclusion. But it proved my signature had been attached to terms I had never approved. 3 days after the wedding, Caroline received a letter from Elaine Ashford's attorney. Elaine wanted to provide limited documents and a statement explaining how they had reached Jacob. We met through counsel by video. Elaine looked composed, but there was a stiffness in the way she held herself that reminded me of someone standing through pain because sitting would make it visible. "I did not send anything to the press," she said before Caroline asked the first question. "We know the live stream was already operating," Caroline replied. "We need to understand where the documents came from." Elaine had begun reviewing the family's financial records after discovering transfers from an account she jointly owned with Gregory. Their family office maintained a shared digital archive for tax records, investment instructions, insurance documents, and payments requiring approval from marital assets. Gregory had used that archive to request recurring support payments. Because Elaine was a joint owner of the account and a client of the family office, she had lawful access to the records. Inside the archive, she found a private support agreement signed by Gregory and Amber. She found an invoice from a prenatal testing laboratory. She also found messages Gregory had uploaded to justify the payments, including one in which he referred to the test as confirmation. Elaine did not have Amber's medical chart. She did not obtain anything from a doctor or hospital. Gregory had placed the documents into a financial archive himself because he wanted money released without explaining the purpose directly. "I asked him whether Jacob knew," Elaine said. "What did he say?" I asked. "That Jacob would give the child a clean name." The sentence made my stomach tighten. Gregory had not only planned to avoid public responsibility, he had expected another man to raise his child without knowing the truth. Elaine told us she had given Gregory one opportunity to disclose everything before the wedding. He refused. Her attorney then arranged the sealed delivery to Jacob. "I did not know the microphone would be live," Elaine said. "I intended for him to read it privately before he made a legal and personal commitment." I believed her, but belief still was not enough. Her attorney provided the courier receipt, the delivery instructions, and a declaration from Jacob's sister confirming she had received the package and handed it directly to him. The chain did not include me anywhere. Before the call ended, Claire asked one question: "Who paid the legal fees connected to the support agreement?" Elaine looked down at one of the documents. The request listed North Star guest experience. That was the first direct bridge between Amber's pregnancy and the vendor file. Claire began tracing the payments we could already see in the company ledger. North Star had paid rent on an apartment Amber used in Washington several weekends each month. It had reimbursed travel expenses that matched dates Amber and Gregory had both been away. It had paid the law firm that drafted the private support agreement. None of those expenses appeared in Amber's compensation records. None had been approved as executive benefits. Mercer Hospitality had been paying a consulting company that was, in turn, financing the concealment of my sister's relationship. The paternity scandal and the accounting scandal were not two separate disasters. They were the same system. On May 16th, Sterling Family Office formally froze the $12 million letter of intent. The notice did not accuse anyone of fraud. It stated that the financial and governance representations provided by Mercer Hospitality could no longer be relied upon until an independent review was complete. 2 hours later, Mercer Hospitality sued me. The complaint accused me of breaching my fiduciary duty, misusing confidential information, interfering with the Sterling transaction, and causing damage to the company's reputation. They attached the first North Star invoice with my signature. They did not attach my exception log. They attached the forged email to Jacob. They did not attach the original message headers. They described the wedding documents as private information I had obtained through my position. They did not mention Elaine. Caroline read the complaint without reacting. Then she closed the file. "They made one mistake," she said. "Only one? They sued you before they knew what we could subpoena. Because I was now a defendant, we had the right to demand records related to the accusations against me. We could request the original electronic documents, domain registration records, vendor files, internal communications, and testimony from the people who claimed I had acted alone." The company's insurance carrier accepted my legal defense request under a reservation of rights, which meant it would advance part of the cost while continuing to investigate coverage. For the first time, my parents' decision to attack me created a formal process they could not completely control. That evening, Caroline received the original header from the forged email Jacob had preserved. The message had been sent through a domain designed to resemble my real address. The purchaser's identity was hidden from the public. The payment trail was not. The domain had been registered using a corporate card assigned to the executive office at Mercer Hospitality. Caroline looked at the transaction date. The card had been charged 3 days before my family removed me from the wedding guest list. The domain registration gave Caroline a trail, but not yet a person. The corporate card belonged to Mercer Hospitality's executive office. Mom used it most often, but Dad's assistant and 2 senior administrators also had authority to charge expenses to the account. A payment record could place the purchase inside the company. It could not prove who had entered the card number. On May 22nd, our lender and the company's crime insurer began the formal forensic review. A neutral electronic discovery company copied the relevant email servers, finance workstations, and Mom's company laptop. Each copy was assigned a digital hash, so no one could later claim Claire had altered the files. I was not allowed to search the material myself. That frustrated me more than I admitted. I had built the folder structures, named the approval queues, and trained half the accounting staff. I knew which reports could answer our questions faster than anyone else. But the lawsuit had changed the rules. Every document had to come through discovery. Every device had to be preserved. Every conclusion had to be made by someone who could testify without being accused of working for me. The company's insurer agreed to advance part of my legal fees while it investigated whether the policy covered the claims. It was not a declaration that I was innocent. It meant I could continue defending myself without draining my savings before the truth reached a courtroom. The first access report arrived several days later. A badge assigned to Maya Torres had opened the finance corridor shortly after midnight on the night someone accessed the emergency approval records. Maya's badge had also opened the records room where backup authorization forms were stored. Then I learned she had been given expanded vendor authority after I was suspended. For several hours, the evidence seemed simple. Maya had uploaded the original North Star packet. Her badge had entered the restricted area. She had received more authority after I was removed. I thought I had found the person who helped frame me. Claire did not share my certainty. "The system recorded a badge," she said. "It did not record Maya's hand. People do not usually lend security credentials. People also do not usually create fake companies to finance affairs. We are already outside the usual." Caroline arranged a meeting with Maya, and the attorney she had recently hired. Maya arrived wearing the navy blazer she usually reserved for lender visits. She sat rigidly across from me and kept both hands wrapped around a paper cup of water. I began with the badge report. Your card entered finance after midnight on April 23rd. I know what the report says. You uploaded North Star's vendor packet. That was my job. You were granted additional authority after I was suspended. Her mouth tightened. I did not choose who was suspended. Did you use the emergency workflow to approve North Star invoices? No. Did you give anyone else your badge? No. The answer came too quickly. I pushed a copy of the access report toward her. Then explain this. Her attorney placed a hand over the page. She has answered. Maya, almost $700,000 moved through a vendor file you maintained. I maintained what I was given. By whom? She looked toward Caroline, then back at me. I did not steal money. I did not ask whether you stole it. You already decided what you think. She stood before her attorney could stop her. My mother still works in that hotel, she said. Some of us cannot afford to turn every suspicion into a moral test. Then she left. I was angry at her for walking away. I was more angry when I realized she was right about me. I had looked at a badge log and converted it into a complete human motive. It was the same kind of reasoning my family had used against me. A record could prove access. It could not, by itself, explain fear. The forensic team found another piece 2 days later. The emergency workflow had not required my password. It allowed the controller to enter an approval under the authority of the finance department when an executive was unavailable. The vendor file contained an image of my signature, but it was not a secure digital certificate. Someone had copied it from the original North Star proposal and placed it onto later authorization pages. An email from Mom's office instructed the controller to process the invoices, as Rachel previously authorized. That sentence did most of the framing. It did not say I had signed each payment. It created a paper trail suggesting everyone believed I had already approved the relationship. The system I had designed to keep hotels operating during emergencies had been used to make fraudulent spending look like delegated management. 3 days after our failed meeting, Maya's attorney contacted Caroline. Maya was willing to speak again. This time, I listened before asking questions. Her mother, Rosa, had worked as a laundry supervisor at our flagship hotel for nearly 19 years. Rosa's position provided the health insurance covering treatment for a chronic kidney condition. During renovation cuts, Mom had told Maya that several laundry positions might be eliminated. Then she asked to borrow Maya's badge. Mom said she needed to retrieve a seating document from my office without disturbing me during the Blue Ridge inspection. Maya knew it violated policy. She also knew her mother could not afford to lose coverage. I handed her the badge in the parking garage, Maya said. She returned it the next morning. Did you enter the finance corridor with her? No. Did you see where she went? I saw her leave the elevator carrying a folder from your office. Maya also admitted she had processed later North Star documents after my suspension. She had not created them, but she had stopped asking questions. Mom had rewarded her with additional authority and reminded her that Rosa's job was being reviewed. I knew something was wrong, Maya said. I told myself it was above my level. Her voice broke slightly, but she did not ask me to forgive her. I will accept discipline for lending the badge, she continued. I will testify to what happened. I looked at her for a moment. I owe you an apology. Her expression remained guarded. I saw your name in a log and treated it like the whole story, I said. I should have asked what pressure was behind it before deciding what kind of person you were. That does not make what I did right. No, it makes both things true. Maya's statement helped, but it was not enough on its own. The security cameras had already overwritten the relevant footage. We still needed electronic records to support her account. The subpoena to the domain registrar produced the purchaser information, billing record, and administrative login history for the false email address. The corporate card charge led to Mom's executive office. The administrative login had been saved in the browser cache of her company laptop. The forensic image also contained a login token tied to the fake domain's control panel. It did not prove Mom personally typed every word, but it placed the creation and management of the false account on the device assigned to her. Then the investigators found the electronic version of my responsibility statement. It had been stored in a shared legal folder. The revision history confirmed what the paper version had only suggested. The document had been drafted before I was suspended, before the forged email was sent, and before Jacob received the wedding envelope. Mom's laptop had been used to access the file repeatedly. The confession was not a reaction. It was part of the plan. I thought that was the worst document the forensic team would find. Then Amber contacted me from a new number. She sent one photograph before Caroline instructed her to communicate through her own attorney. The image showed an open folder on Mom's desk. The label read, "Alternative Responsibility Statement." Beneath it was Amber's full name. Caroline warned me that a photograph was only a lead. We needed the original file, its history, and a lawful chain of custody. But Amber did not sound like the woman who had accused me of destroying her wedding. Her voice shook when she called through her attorney the next morning. "Mom didn't save me instead of you," she said. "She just planned to use me second." Amber came to Caroline's office with her own attorney. That was my first condition. My second was that she hand over her phone through a forensic technician, not email me selected screenshots. My third was that no one promise her immunity, forgiveness, or protection from the consequences of what she had done. Amber objected to all three. "You're treating me like a criminal," she said. "I'm treating you like someone who knows evidence has already been altered. I came here to help you. You came here because you found out Mom had prepared a statement blaming you." Her attorney shifted beside her. Amber placed both hands over her stomach. At 18 weeks, she had barely shown at the wedding. Now the pregnancy was visible beneath her loose cream dress. "You could try being my sister for 5 minutes," she said. "I have spent 33 years being your sister." That is not what it felt like. Caroline reminded us that the forensic technician was waiting in the next room. Amber surrendered her phone. The technician copied the device, created a digital hash, and sealed the original backup media. Anything useful would have to be verified against that copy. No one would be allowed to claim later that I had edited a message or created an audio file. Once the process was complete, Caroline asked Amber to explain the photograph she had sent. Amber said she had gone to our parents' house after the wedding to collect clothes and personal documents. Mom was at the hotel dealing with lenders. Dad was meeting company counsel. In Mom's study, a filing drawer had been left unlocked. Amber found 2 folders. One held the responsibility statement accusing me. The second carried her name. "I thought she was protecting me," Amber said. "What did the statement say?" Caroline asked. "That I created North Star without their knowledge. That I used Gregory's influence to submit false invoices. That I manipulated Dad and hid everything from Rachel. Was any of that true?" I asked. She looked at me. "Some of it." Her attorney touched her arm, but Amber continued. "I knew North Star was paying for the apartment." "The Washington apartment?" She nodded. "And the travel?" "Yes." "The legal fees?" I did not know every bill, but I knew Gregory was routing expenses through the company. "Why?" He said it was temporary. There it was again. Temporary. The favorite word of people who intended someone else to solve the permanent consequences. Amber looked down at her hands. "He said once Jacob's family invested, the company would stabilize. Then Gregory would replace the money through another deal." "You believed him?" "I wanted to." "That is not the same thing." "No, Rachel. It isn't." For once, she did not cry. She looked tired in a way makeup could not fix. "You always had access to everything," she said. "The bank accounts, the lender calls, Dad's office, every serious decision. I had responsibility for everything. You had power. I had the power to be blamed when something failed. That is not how it looked from where I stood." I leaned back. "What did it look like?" "It looked like Dad trusted you. Employees respected you. When you walked into a meeting, people stopped talking and listened. I was the one sent to smile for photographs." "You enjoyed the photographs?" "I did. That does not mean I wanted to be useless." I had spent years assuming Amber preferred being protected from responsibility. I had never considered that being praised for her appearance while I was trusted with real decisions might have felt like another kind of insult. It did not excuse what she had done, but it explained why Gregory had been able to reach her. He treated you like you were important, I said. He asked what I thought. He said I understood branding in a way you never would. He said I could bring in opportunities you could not. And Jacob? Her face tightened. Jacob loved me. Did you love him? Yes. Then why were you going to let him believe Gregory's child was his? She looked toward the window. I kept thinking I would tell him after the investment was signed, then after the wedding, then after the baby was born. That is not a plan. It is a series of delays. I know that now. You knew it then. Her eyes came back to mine. Yes. That single word mattered more than an apology. Amber had not been an innocent woman swept into someone else's fraud. She had made choices because each lie protected something she wanted. Caroline returned with a preliminary report from the forensic technician. The photograph had been a lead. The real file was stronger. The electronic discovery team had found the alternative responsibility statement on Mom's company laptop and in the shared legal drive. It had been created within 24 hours of the statement blaming me. The two documents used the same template. Mine said I had created North Star because I resented Amber. Amber's said she had created North Star because she was reckless, entitled, and desperate to secure her marriage. Mom had prepared 2 daughters for sacrifice before deciding which one would be more useful. Amber read the first page and went pale. She told me you were trying to destroy us, she said. She told me you were too fragile to survive the truth. She said you hated me. She said you needed protecting. We sat across from each other with 2 different lies between us, both written by the same person. Amber's phone backup contained more. There were invoices she had sent Gregory for the Washington apartment, designer clothing used during promotional appearances, and trips described as brand research. There were messages from Gregory telling her not to worry about the timing because the Sterling transaction would make the old irregularities too small to matter. There was a text from Amber to Mom. Rachel will take the accounting hit, right? Mom had answered. She is built for difficult things. Amber had known. Not every detail. Not the forged email. Or the responsibility statement. But she had known our mother planned to make me absorb the accounting consequences. You asked her that, I said. Amber lowered her eyes. I wanted to know what would happen. You wanted to know what would happen to you. Yes. The technician also recovered an audio recording. Amber had recorded a conversation with Mom 4 days before the wedding. Because Amber had participated in the conversation in Virginia, the recording was lawful. Mom's voice was clear. If anyone asks, Rachel has been obsessed with North Star for weeks. Say she threatened to expose your pregnancy, unless the board gave her more control. Amber's voice asked, what if Jacob talks to her? He won't. She has already been told to stay away. Then Mom said, once the wedding is over, people will believe the version that protects the family. The recording did not prove every part of the fraud. It proved Mom was constructing the story before the wedding. Amber authenticated the conversation for her attorney. What happens to me now? She asked. Caroline answered before I could. You cooperate. You tell the truth under oath. You accept that cooperation does not erase liability. Amber looked at me. Is that what you want? I want the truth recorded somewhere Mom cannot rewrite it. The final piece arrived through Discovery 2 days later. It was a message from Dad to Mom, sent after I refused to sign the management letter. Rachel will recover. Amber won't. I read it 3 times. Dad had not been trapped by Mom's plan. He had evaluated us. He chose the daughter he believed could survive being destroyed. That message hurt more than the forged email, the board vote, or the wedding ban. It reduced years of being called strong into a calculation of how much pain I could absorb without inconveniencing anyone. By early July, our lender had seen enough. Mercer Hospitality had violated loan covenants, submitted disputed management representations, and allowed evidence to be handled by people accused of altering it. The lender petitioned the court to appoint a limited receiver to protect the assets and records. Mom blamed me. Dad blamed Mom. Amber blamed Gregory. Gregory claimed Amber and Mom had used him. By then, each of them had separate attorneys. The court allowed expedited depositions before the receivership hearing. Caroline placed 4 sworn declarations across the conference table. In Mom's version, I created North Star. In Dad's, Mom controlled it without his knowledge. In Amber's, Gregory designed it and told her I had approved it. In Gregory's, Amber and Mom forced him to help them. All 4 stories could not be true. Caroline tapped the stack. Next week, they do not only have to defend themselves against you, she said. They have to defend themselves against their own words. I testified first. Caroline made that decision before my family had the chance to turn the first North Star invoice into a surprise. The deposition took place in a conference room at a court reporting office in Richmond. I sat across from company counsel with my exception log, the original proposal, and the voluntary disclosure I had already provided to the lender and insurer. They asked whether the signature on the $48,000 invoice was mine. Yes. They asked whether I had approved North Star as a vendor. I approved one preliminary invoice under a written condition that supporting documents be supplied. They asked whether those documents arrived. No. Then you failed to enforce your own control. Yes. The attorney paused, as if he had expected me to fight the word. I did not. I should have stopped the second payment sooner, I said. That was my management failure. It does not mean I formed North Star, altered the proposal, approved the later invoices, or received any of the money. By the time my deposition ended, the mistake my family had planned to reveal was already part of the record in my own words. They could still criticize me. They could no longer use it to make me look deceptive. Mom testified 2 days later. I was not in the room, but Caroline received the transcript and exhibits that evening. Mom swore that I had never warned the board about North Star before my suspension. Caroline showed her the formal memorandum dated April 16th, along with the outside accounting firm's delivery receipt. Mom said she did not consider it a warning because it contained no direct accusation of fraud. Caroline asked whether she had received it. Mom admitted she had. Then Mom testified that my responsibility statement had been drafted only after I was placed on leave. Caroline showed her the electronic revision history produced from the company laptop. The first version had been created 6 days before my suspension. It already contained the total of $684,000. It already accused me of threatening Jacob. Mom changed her answer. She said the document had been created at Dad's request as a general contingency plan. Caroline produced the registrar records for the fake email domain, the corporate card charge from Mom's executive office, and the browser artifacts recovered from her laptop. Mom said several employees had used the computer. Then Caroline placed the 2 responsibility statements side by side. One blamed me. The other blamed Amber. Both had been created from the same template within 24 hours. Mom could not explain why an innocent company needed 2 different daughters prepared to confess to the same missing money. Dad testified next. He swore that he believed North Star was legitimate and had no knowledge of Gregory's involvement. Caroline showed him the message he had sent Mom. Denise has handled the Gregory issue. Rachel does not need to know why the vendor exists. Dad said, the Gregory issue referred to financing introductions. Then Caroline showed him the management representation letter he signed after receiving my formal memorandum. He had certified that management knew of no undisclosed related party transactions. He admitted he had not asked who owned North Star before signing. Finally, Caroline presented the message that had stayed with me since discovery. Rachel will recover. Amber won't. Dad stared at it before answering. He said he had been discussing the emotional effect of scandal on his daughters. Caroline asked whether he knew I would be blamed for the accounting problem. He said he knew responsibility would fall on the department I managed, even after she refused to certify the records. Dad did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, he said, I believed she could withstand it. That sentence entered the transcript exactly as he said it. Amber's deposition lasted longer. At first, she claimed Gregory had handled North Star and told her everything had been approved. Caroline showed her the invoices Amber had submitted for the Washington apartment, clothing, and travel. Amber admitted she knew the descriptions did not match the expenses. She denied, knowing I had been selected to take the blame. Then Caroline showed her text. Rachel will take the accounting hit, right? Amber began to cry. This time, the court reporter did not stop typing. Amber admitted she had known Mom expected me to absorb the financial consequences. She said she did not know about the forged email or the confession prepared in my name. Caroline played the recording Amber had authenticated. Mom's voice instructed her to say, "I had threatened to reveal the pregnancy unless the board gave me more control." Amber confirmed the conversation had taken place 4 days before the wedding. Her cooperation exposed Mom's plan. It did not erase Amber's participation. Gregory testified last. He denied owning or controlling North Star. Caroline showed him the formation records, connecting the company to his regular attorney. He said the attorney formed many entities. She showed him the bank records identifying Gregory as the controlling person for North Star's account. He said the designation had been administrative. She showed him the payment for the Washington apartment, the support agreement, and the email promising that the Sterling investment would absorb the irregularities. Gregory blamed Amber. Then he blamed Mom. Then he claimed everyone had misunderstood his role. The more he spoke, the smaller his story became. By the time the depositions ended, no two members of my family were protecting the same version of events. The receivership hearing took place on July 21st. It was not a criminal trial. No one was brought into court in handcuffs. The judge was deciding whether Mercer Hospitality's assets and records could safely remain under my parents' control. The lender presented short excerpts from the depositions, the disputed management letter, the cash flow report, and an affidavit from the forensic examiner. The evidence showed covenant defaults, inconsistent certifications, altered vendor records, and executive devices connected to the forged email. The company had less than 2 months of operating cash. The judge appointed a limited receiver. The receiver received control over operating accounts, records, major contracts, and asset sales. Mom and Dad were removed from daily management. Amber was suspended. No one in my family could access the financial systems without permission. The judge did not decide who would go to prison or how much anyone owed. She preserved the company long enough for those questions to be investigated properly. Outside the courtroom, Dad tried to speak to me. "This is what you wanted?" he asked. "I wanted the records protected. You handed our company to a stranger. You handed it to him when you signed statements you knew were disputed." The receiver met with Caroline and me that afternoon. He explained that Mercer Hospitality had 2 realistic options. The first was foreclosure and liquidation. Several properties would close, and most employees would lose their jobs. The second required selling one underperforming venue, restructuring the remaining debt, and transferring daily operations to new management. He needed someone who understood every hotel, lender requirement, payroll cycle, and vendor contract. He wanted me to stay for 3 months. Dad, seated at the other end of the table, looked relieved. He assumed the employees would pull me back into the role I had always played. The receiver slid a proposed consulting agreement toward me. I did not touch it. "I will consider helping with the transition," I said. "But not as a Mercer executive, and not as anyone's daughter." Dad's relief disappeared. The receiver asked what I needed. I looked at the contract, then, at the people who had spent years treating my competence as a family resource they could use without permission. "I have 3 conditions. My first condition was that the receiver pay me the full market rate for every hour I worked. No family discount. No deferred fee. No promise that I would be compensated after the company recovered. My second condition was that no member of the Mercer family could direct me, approve my work, access the financial system, or participate in hiring and firing during the transition. My third condition was a fixed end date, 3 months. No automatic extension. No offer of a permanent executive position hidden in the agreement." The receiver read the conditions without reacting. Dad did. "You expect to be paid while the company is fighting to survive?" "I expect to be paid because the company is fighting to survive. You own stock. That does not make my labor free. This is still your family's business." I looked at him. That sentence is why the contract needs boundaries. The receiver added the conditions. I added several more to the operating plan. Payroll and health benefits had to be protected before executive claims or shareholder distributions. major payments required two independent approvals. No former Mercer executive could enter the finance office without written permission. The underperforming venue and its adjoining land had to be marketed immediately. I would help transfer operations. I would not invest my own money, guarantee another loan, or surrender my shares to make the restructuring easier for my parents. The receiver signed the agreement on July 28th. I signed after him. Dad did not sign anything, because for the first time in his career, his approval was not required. The next 3 months were the hardest work I had ever done for Mercer Hospitality. They were also the first months when the work had clear limits. I met with hotel managers, payroll staff, lenders, wedding clients, and the buyer considering our remaining properties. Every conversation began with the same question. What had to remain operating so innocent people did not pay for decisions they had never made? The answer was not the Mercer name. It was the employees, customer deposits, health insurance, vendor contracts, and buildings that still produced revenue. The receiver sold our weakest event venue and the neighboring land for approximately $5,400,000. Most of the proceeds went to liens, transaction costs, and secured debt. About $2,200,000 remained as working capital. It was enough to preserve payroll, complete several prepaid weddings, and keep the strongest properties open while a new operating company assumed control. The sale hurt Dad more than any deposition. He had called that venue the beginning of his legacy. I remembered spending summers there as a teenager, folding napkins and checking place cards, while he told guests he had built everything from nothing. He had built something valuable. Then he had treated its survival as permission to lie. The receiver removed Mom from every management position. Her access card was canceled, her laptop remained in evidence, and she was prohibited from contacting employees about the investigation. The lender and insurance company referred the evidence involving the false domain, altered documents, and North Star transactions to the proper authorities. There was no dramatic arrest. There were interviews, subpoenas, settlement discussions, and months of legal bills. Mom eventually agreed to financial restitution and restrictions that prevented her from managing company funds, while the larger investigation continued. For most of her life, she had controlled our family by deciding which version of every event would be repeated. Now her own words existed in transcripts, emails, and forensic reports she could not edit. Dad was forced to withdraw the public accusation against me. The statement appeared on the Mercer Hospitality website for 30 days and was sent directly to our lender, insurer, outside accountants, and the Sterling family. It said the company no longer alleged that I created North Star, sent the email to Jacob, or arranged the wedding delivery. It did not apologize. Dad said legal counsel would not allow emotional language. I did not need emotion from him. I needed the lie removed from the record. The personal guarantee on the renovation loan did not disappear when Dad lost control of the company. He and Mom had placed a second deed of trust on their house as security. When the restructuring left a deficiency, the house had to be sold. The home where Mom had hosted charity dinners and reminded everyone that the Mercers had earned their place in Richmond society went on the market before Thanksgiving. Dad also lost his seats on 2 local business boards. He told a mutual acquaintance that I had allowed outsiders to dismantle his life. I did not correct him. The company was still operating. His authority was what had been dismantled. Amber was terminated for cause under her employment agreement. Because the expenses she submitted through North Star had not been legitimate business costs, she received no severance. The receiver pursued repayment for the apartment, travel, clothing, and legal expenses. Amber moved out of the Washington apartment and into a smaller rental near Richmond. Without the company card, Gregory's money, assistance, or the image of the perfect Mercer wedding, she had to live on what she could actually afford. She gave birth on October 4th. I did not attend the delivery. I sent flowers and a short note through her attorney because, at that point, direct contact between us still turned too quickly into requests I was not willing to accept. A post-birth cheek swab test in November confirmed Gregory was the father. In December, the family court entered a temporary child support order. Amber remained the child's primary caregiver. She did not lose custody because she had lied about paternity or misused company funds. The court handled parenting and financial support through the normal process rather than treating scandal as proof she was an unfit mother. Gregory's investment firm suspended him when the North Star records became public in the civil proceedings. They dismissed him after the bank documents identified him as the person controlling the shell company. Elaine filed for divorce in July. By the time I am telling this story, the divorce is still pending because their attorneys are tracing which marital assets Gregory used to support Amber and conceal the relationship. Gregory also faced the company's claim to recover the North Star payments. He had once made every promise sound like an opportunity. By the end, he communicated with Amber through lawyers. Jacob cooperated with the investigation. He preserved the original forged email, confirmed the delivery chain, and provided the recording from the ceremony. We met once, in Caroline's office. I should have asked you about the email, he said. Yes. I let everyone tell me you were unstable because it was easier than postponing the wedding. Yes. He looked surprised that I did not soften the answer. I'm sorry, he said. I believe you. That was all. He did not reunite with Amber, become my closest friend, or transform into the hero of my story. He was a man who had ignored difficult questions until one was asked in front of a live microphone. Amber contacted me after the paternity order. She said cooperating against Mom should count for something. It does, I told her. Then when do we get to be sisters again? We have always been sisters. That is not the same as being close. I gave you the recording. You gave investigators evidence of something you participated in. I told the truth. After the lie stopped protecting you, she was silent. I did not tell her we would never have a relationship. I also did not offer immediate forgiveness because she was tired, frightened, or now responsible for a child. We agreed to communicate through email at first. I would receive updates about the baby. I would not pay Amber's bills, provide regular childcare, negotiate with Gregory, or return to my old role as the person who repaired every consequence. She called the boundary cruel. A month later, she called it clear. My consulting contract ended on October 28th. By then, the new operating team could handle payroll, vendor approvals, and lender reporting without calling me. Most employees kept their jobs. Customer deposits remained protected. The strongest hotels stayed open. The independent review concluded that I had committed one management failure when I allowed the first North Star invoice to proceed without enforcing the documentation deadline. It also concluded that I had not participated in the fraud. The civil claims against me were withdrawn as part of the restructuring settlement. On my last afternoon, I cleared the temporary office the receiver had given me. Dad was waiting in the lobby. He held my old executive access card. I found this in the records room, he said. It was always yours. The card had opened every office in the company. For years, I had mistaken that access for trust. I placed my consultant badge on the counter beside it. The new management team should deactivate both. You could still run this place. I know. Then why are you walking away? Because I finally understood that being capable of carrying something did not make it mine to carry. I did not say that aloud. I handed the new general manager the final employee transition list and confirmed that the last group of benefits had transferred correctly. In the ballroom, another wedding was being prepared. Staff arranged chairs beneath the restored chandeliers. Florists carried white branches through the side entrance. No one ran after me with a payroll emergency. No one asked me to sign a document someone else had altered. No one told me that being strong meant I owed them another sacrifice. I walked through the glass doors and stepped into the cold October air. I had spent nearly 20 years holding that door open for my family. That afternoon, it closed behind me on its own. For the first time, I did not turn around. You should never confuse being useful with being loved. When people repeatedly ask you to absorb their mistakes, hide their lies, or sacrifice your future to protect their reputation, set clear boundaries and document what happens. Admit your own mistakes honestly, but do not accept blame for choices you did not make. Protect innocent people when you can, yet remember that helping others does not require surrendering your money, career, dignity, or peace. Real strength means choosing responsibility without becoming someone else's scapegoat. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about courage, accountability, and rebuilding your life after family betrayal.